Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. I promised you that there would be a part 2 to my previous video where we used this big bold plumeria background, and this is the second one. So if you missed that video, basically what we're talking about is how we can use stencils and dies together to create a layered look with dimension that does not have necessarily a lot of bulk. So here I am going to be using some of the older Honeybee products with newer Honeybee products to create a really kind of like beachy birthday card. So here I chose to go more like a bit more teal with my water, but you could definitely do more of a true blue. That would be something that would work really nicely. So I'm starting with Salvage Patina, and then I'm going to use Peacock Feathers, Mermaid Lagoon, and Uncharted Mariner. And that's just, I don't know, for some reason, this particular summer season, I'm really feeling that kind of tealish vibe. What I'm doing for mine is, when I do a inked background, I oftentimes like to do what I call like a halo, where it's darker around the edges and lighter in the center. And usually that is because I want to lead the recipient's eye to the center of where my focal point is. Today's card is a bit more like collage-y kind of style, that we have some parts that balance each other out nicely, but it isn't necessarily one central focal point. We just kind of want to lead their eye around the card, but I wasn't sure how I was going to put it together when I did my inking. Using the halo type of ink blending still works well for it. And then if you watched the other video where we did the stencil and the cover plate, they were very similar. They were both palm fronds, so it was just like laying the same texture over each other. Today, that's not going to be the case. Today, we're going to bring in a different texture on top of our the faux kind of texture that we create with the background. This is really going to be more about movement to add interest, because we have the waves stencil that's going to create movement. And then we have the fishing net die, which I have not used nearly enough this year, and I really, really like it. Definitely need to incorporate it into a few more cards before this summer is up. And then the elements that we're going to use. So here, if you're not familiar with this particular stencil, this is a couple of years old, but it's still good. I still use it pretty frequently. But it has a base layer and a top layer. So this one is the base layer. And for the base layer, the areas that are masked off are a bit wider. But I am reapplying the color in the same way that we put it down. So I am putting the darker colors more toward the outside and the lighter colors more towards the center. And then once I work all the way out to my lightest color, normally when I'm ink blending, I will do it twice. So I'll start with my lightest color, work out to my darkest, from my darkest back into my lightest. This time, because I wanted to keep the layers consistent, I worked from my darkest into my lightest, and then when I switch the stencils, I am going to do the same exact thing. So here, this is the lightest color, the Salvage Patina. And it is picking up some of that darker color that we've already put down, but that's great. We want that. We want it to create a nice wave contrast through the halo of color. Here is that second layer, and it fits just super nicely right over those base layer lines. And so this is a little bit thinner, and it'll fill in the base layer lines, but it's not going to be as pigmented. Like, it's not going to cover up those lines because it has an extra layer of color. I hope that makes sense. I.e., you're still going to be able to see them. So I started in with the Salvage Patina, and now I'm going to go back out to that darkest color and then just, again, work my way back in, because that's how I did it the first time, and I want the coloring around the edges to be consistent. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I just spent a really long time talking about how I did the stenciling for something that is probably relatively simple. So I apologize if I over-explained that. So this, as I told you in the last one, which you may have not seen, if you're like, Kelly, I don't know what video you're referring to, totally no problem. I will link it below if you'd like to go check it out. It features another way that you can use stencils with dies to layer. You will see parts of that in this video just because I made them at the same time. But then both of these videos ended up being like a half an hour long, so it just wasn't reasonable to use them together. And you know, you might be looking for a more monochromatic color, which would be the first card we made, the first card in the other video, or, you know, something a little less. So for this one, I'm using old paper, and I'm just going to kind of roughly, I'm not looking for smooth color application here by any means, just roughly adding the old paper to this cardstock, and then I am going to use this to die cut the fishnet from, after we do a little bit of like water spattering and some perfect pearls. Speaking of that other card, here is some of those pieces. And so for this card that we're making today with the fishnet and the waves, I'm going to be using the perfect pearls in the color perfect pearls, as well as in gold. I did not put the gold perfect pearls on the water, but I did put them on the fishnet background. Just because I like a little shine and a little splatter. Plus we've used distress inks here, so I'm able to go in and splatter a little bit with just clean water. And it's just going to add some interest to those backgrounds. Splatters are not for everyone, and that's totally fine. You can absolutely skip that step if you are trying to remake this card or make a card similar to it. I just personally like how when you look at it in the light, it has some areas that are a little bit shiny and sparkly. So here is that fishnet die. It is the size of an A2 size card. I hold it in place with a little bit of tape on the back side, and most of it being on top of the cover plate, because when we run it through our die cutting machine, it is going to cut through that tape as well as the cardstock. Then for this one, this is the bold background plumeria, which works pretty similar to a Lovely Layers, and these are the Seashell's Lovely Layers. We recently, Honeybee came out with a smaller version of these seashells, but I chose the large ones for today. And I'm going to cut all of them out of white. So here is our fishnet done. And for the added dimension, I'm going to be using pumice stone and scorched timber. This is a new to me. This is the first time I've ever even opened this ink pad. Very pretty color. It's a cooler brown. But by looking at the fishnet and seeing where some of the net like dips in and accenting that, why can't I talk, guys? Accenting that dip with darker colors, it gives the movement to the fishnet that it didn't previously have. If you watched the other video, some of this you've already seen, but I didn't want to bank on everybody having seen the other one or being interested in seeing the other one. So this is that bold background plumeria that we cut out. I'm coloring up the leaves for that. I chose some cooler greens, so just adding a little bit of shading toward the bottom of the leaf and then kind of up the middle of its spine, and then just blending that out, just a 3-color blend. For this card, I used two of the larger plumerias and one of like the middle-sized, and then one that kind of looks from the side and one that's a bud. I added shading to them using some blue-violet Copic markers, and what you see me doing there is just putting in that little lip that most plumerias have as they grow. They kind of create like a pinwheel, and so I chose to do the blue-violet because I thought that it would be more interesting with the yellow centers, which is how I chose to color mine. And again, if you watch the other video, you have seen some of this, but it never hurts to take a second look at it. But for these, because of the way that they built the background, they are either whole, complete flowers, like the ones that you see me doing here, or if they are a layered flower, like where they have multiple layers that you would glue together, they actually have a base. And because they have a base, you can use them as die cut plumerias, almost like a lovely layers, without having to attach them to the background die cut, which you can see kind of off to the right. So here, when I use them this time, I will be using the base piece because that's how I'm going to attach them all together. So I put my greens down, and then I've been doing so many videos lately with the lovely layers. They're really well done. It just happens to be kind of like what happened in the last week or so. But I like to kind of lay them down on top of each other to see where the shadows are going to be, and then that way if I need to trace that out I can. For these ones it was pretty obvious where the shading was going to be, so I didn't feel the need to necessarily trace it, and then I did add that little kind of extra line of shading to create the curled up lip portion of the flower. It is important when you're doing that to leave the edge white so that it looks like a highlighted area that would be turning up and over. So you want to add the line to the shadow, or the line for the shadow, and then add any of your extra shading on the inside of that line. Whichever way you want it to be turning would be the inside. And then for the yellows, I added just a little bit of a darker yellow into the center, and then very little of a mid-tone, just kind of a couple little, strokes, like little starbursts from the center, and then blended that out with a much lighter yellow. And this is just it's a more interesting way to color something white by adding the shadows. So then this one also has this teeny tiny little part on that front flower, and that shows how it's kind of up and over itself. So now that we finished all the coloring, obviously you can see all of them colored together, but we're not going to be using all of these on our cards today. These were split up into 2 cards. And if you are interested in that plumeria background, Honeybee does have a layering guide for it, so you know how many to cut of each of them. But since I was splitting them up into 2 cards, I did cut some extras. I used my Honeybee reverse tweezers and my precision glue press to put them together. I put together the lovely layers almost exclusively with tweezers. There are some exceptions, like these larger ones, these seashells. I wouldn't need tweezers necessarily, though I may still use them, to be quite honest. So in yesterday's video where we worked with the autumn elements, we talked a lot about warm and cool colors. So here I am using cool grays to add a little bit of shading to these ones in particular. So I'm just following the lines. If you've used the lovely layers before, you know that they emboss lots of detail. So I'm just seeing where those lines go from the embossing, and then I'm just following that out. So I want these to stay pretty light. I don't want it to be a completely gray seashell, but I do want to add some interest with the shading to not only give them more dimension, but help give them some shape. So what you see me doing here. If you've watched my coloring videos before, you know that I typically say, you need to figure out if you're a person who likes to flick towards yourself or away from yourself. And that is why I turn them so often, because I am a person who likes to flick away from myself. That's just more comfortable for me. So here, working all the way out to the C1, and then there's nothing wrong with this seashell. You could absolutely leave it this way. I don't have, outside of the background and the leaves, I have a lot of neutrals in this card. So I did want to add just a little extra something. So I'm going to choose some really desaturated blues. And all that means is that those blues just have more gray in them than other blues do, and I'm going to just follow those kind of same lines with these 2, the darker one first and then the lighter one to blend it out. And this is just going to be something, again, that just adds in a little bit of color, because I have these white flowers, neutral colored seashells, really bold, bright, kind of tealish water, neutral colored fishing net. So just in order to kind of just bring something else to the table, I wanted to include the blues, but using the grays just by themselves is totally fine too. I colored another one like that, though it didn't end up making it onto the card. I think it did make it into the photos though. So here, that is that seashell completed. And then we'll move on to the next one. This one we're going to start with warm grays. Warm grays tend to be a bit on the browner side. Like they look more like a brown. And because this one has the 3 different layers, I am going to use that little kind of shading trick where I'm stacking them up on top of each other just to make sure that I'm getting the shadows where they need to be. And then for this one, again, I left, I didn't want it to be completely gray, so I did leave a lot of lighter areas, and I just went in with the darkest color first. You do want to make sure when you're putting your lovely layers together that as you're doing the layers that you're coloring the edges, so that way you don't run the risk that the white edge is going to stick out like a sore thumb in the middle of your design. Before I give up on the darkest color altogether, I am going to fill in these little embossed kind of spots that are on the seashells. This is what's going to give it a little bit more of a realistic look, more dimension, because it has all these, you know, the detail things that really make them kind of shine. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to move in to the mid-tone, and then I'll finish filling in those spots, and then as well as kind of extending out the darker shading with this color kind of around the edges toward the center. So while we're doing this, while we're coloring them up, so recently, I don't know if I've told you guys this. Can I tell you, and I'm sure you can probably tell already, my allergies are so bad today. Normally, I can sit down and I can do a voiceover for my video, and it's like one take. Like yesterday, I did one take, and it was like 35 minutes. I just talked for the 35 minutes about the video. Today, I've had to stop this thing, I'm not even kidding you, like 6 times so that I could sneeze. Oh, man. It's just, some days are like that. But anyway, might have told you guys recently. Let me talk about what I'm doing here. So in order to make this just a little bit more interesting, I decided to go back in with a cool gray and go right over top of those spots just to make them a bit more neutral so that they would stand out against that warmer background. And then we're going to move on to the third and final shell. For this one, I did stick with the warmer grays, but I'm also going to bring in some E-tones that are a little bit on the peachier side, because, you know, when you see these shells on the beach, typically on the inside is where you would see, you know, kind of like that peachy pink kind of tone. And once again, I don't have a lot of color going on here. So anyway, I may have told you guys, my desk chair, I mean, I know that some people stand to craft, but I don't. I don't have a standing desk. I have a sitting desk. I have a sitting L desk. And so I bought a chair. I think probably when Peanut was heading into like 2nd grade, I think. And we had redone his desk. And so I gave him my old chair and I bought a new one. And so that's probably been like 5-ish years now. But the mechanism to lift up the chair died. Like it just went bad. So I would just be like in the middle of crafting or in the middle of doing a voiceover and my chair would just sink. Now, everybody is different. Some people like to like sit on the floor and they would never even notice if that chair, you know, wouldn't raise them up. But I am the opposite. I like to be super high in my chair. So it was driving me crazy. So after like almost a year of this thing being busted, I decided that I was going to get a new desk chair. And so I started looking around and I had seen that there was some that would allow you to sit cross-legged, like crisscross applesauce. And I love, like, well, I mean, now that I'm older, my knees don't love it as much, but that's pretty much how I'm happiest to sit is with my knees either, you know, crisscrossed, my legs crisscrossed, or the with my feet kind of tucked underneath me on the couch to hold whatever, like if it's my iPad, if I'm drawing or when I was cross-stitching, it just, I mean, pretty much that's how I like to sit. I like to sit with my knees bent, and I'm old and sometimes it hurts, but regardless, I digress. We're going back. So anyway, I had seen that there were some desk chairs like that, but they were like $200 and $300, and I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not. That's too much. Even though I spend a lot of time in this chair, I still feel like that's too much. So I did a little bit more digging, and I was able to find one that was on sale for like $80. And it said it's like extra wide so that you can sit crisscross. Well, it came yesterday, and Peanut very nicely put it together for me, so that I did not have to. He does like to build things. And then he brought it upstairs for me, and he was like, "Are you ready to try your new chair?" And I knew that he was excited about it because he had just built it. So I, stopped what I was doing so that I could get it in the door. Can I tell you that this thing is wide as my door frame? Like, I am sitting in it now. I am sitting in it cross-legged, and like my knees reach edge to edge on this thing. It's so wide. But so far so good. I haven't sunk down. It is a little, like, the higher up you go, kind of like it feels like when you lean forward, it's a little more wobbly, but yeah, really enjoying being able to sit cross-legged without my feet falling asleep. Anywho, so for the sentiments, obviously you can see the sentiment that I used for the other card as well. I treated with my anti-static tool, stamped in our brilliant white pigment ink, and then used some white detail embossing powder. And this one comes from the stamp. What is it called? It's not, I don't know that it's called Seashells. It's the stamp one, which is great, and I've used before as well. But anyway, it says, "May your day be filled with sunshine and seashells." I couldn't say it 3 times fast, but I definitely think that it could be used for kind of a birthday vibe. So now that we have all of the elements, we're going to create a little bit of a balance here in our card design. So we have the movement in the background with the water. And then we have the movement with the fishnet, but also the texture that it gives us. So I'm just going to adhere one over the other. I am going to skip ahead because it does take a minute to get glue on that fishnet area, especially when you're just dotting it on because they're very thin. So we have this, movement. You could absolutely trim that fishnet down if you didn't want it to go edge to edge. I've done that in other cards. Just made it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to use, Honeybee has a couple of different types of foam. One of them is like an 1/8 of an inch, so it's a lower profile, which I really like if I'm going to mail something. And then, and those are round. And then they have the ones that are in the foam strips. That's what I'm using here. Again, a lower profile. And so I'm just going to start to create like this little flower cluster down kind of to the bottom right. Tuck my little leaves in, and you can see one of the leaves over there is just like a half of a leaf. That's just happened to be what I was cutting extras, like how it cut off the paper. But for me, because I'm tucking them behind, it's fine. In fact, this one right here, I'm going to end up cutting it so that it fits underneath my flower the way that I want it to. So first I check it to see how much I can get in there. I know it's not a lot, so then I just go ahead and cut it off. Nobody's going to know, and it suits my flower cluster much better. So once I have that done, to the kind of left-hand side, I'm going to put this more colorful seashell. Up into the top right of that cluster, I am going to put the kind of warmish gray one. Here, I knew I was going to end up popping up my sentiment, and I just figured it would be easier to just go ahead and put the foam on it. For this one, I did do 2 layers because I was pretty sure it was going to be sitting on top of my florals, which already have foam underneath them. So you'll see later on, once I figure out my design, for sure, I will take part of that off. So then I have the 2 seashells on the top right corner. This is creating balance from my bottom left. And then my slightly larger floral cluster in the top left is going to create the balance from the bottom right. So even though they are put together as kind of like 2 different clusters, they play off of each other nicely, because in the bottom right we have 2 flowers, 3 leaves, 2 seashells, and then in the top left we have 3 flowers, 2 leaves, and 1 seashell. So even though they're not the same, their sizes are close, and so because they sit catty corner from each other, they will balance the card out. And then to bring the whole thing together, we will put the sentiment kind of in the middle-ish to put them all together. So here I went ahead and moved my flowers out of the way so that I could get my leaves down. I already kind of knew where they were going to go. That way I didn't have to trim them off. And then I'm going to do the same thing with these flowers. As far as popping them up, I'm going to get them where I want them to be. That one little side flower, I did not end up popping up. It's already like 3 layers of cardstock, so it's a good thickness. And then I'm just going to put that right over the leaf of the seashell, and then I'll pop the other 2 up using that same kind of foam tape. And I was really happy with the way that this card came out. It's not necessarily something that would probably be in my, that people would think would be in my wheelhouse, because I don't make a lot of collage-y style cards. But as the industry changes and we start using different products, somebody had made the comment very sweetly on my Instagram, and they're like, yeah, I think you're starting to become a die person, which have been very clear that I am not a die cut person. But really, I owe all of that to the Lovely Layers series, because they are so well done and so dimensional that it made me want to use them, to want to color them, because I love the way that they look at the end. So once I got my sentiment where I wanted it, I did trim off that excess kind of foam tape. I'm going to add glue there because it will sit on top of the other cardstock. And then to accent it, I am using all right, hold on. I think it's the travel pearl stickers. Yes, it is. And there's a really pretty, kind of light Tiffany blue in there. And I'm going to use that to accent my sentiment and just kind of fill in that area and help guide the eye. And I just use this is Honeybee's die tool, so that you can poke your dies out with those little tiny holes. But I find it works perfectly for kind of picking them up. And then I used, in the same pearl pack, they have a yellowy orange. I used the smallest ones to be the center of my plumerias. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So I hope these 2 videos talking about texture and how you can get dimension and movement are really helpful to you. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.